But really what we want to do is increase muscle synthesis and repair, because that's what recovery is. When we take an athlete who's trained hard, has no rest, doesn't eat well, and then trains the next day in a weight room and then running or whatever, you are increasing the risk for injury. And that's what we want to really try to reduce. And it is about muscle synthesis and then repair of those muscle fibers. And that's what recovery is related to. One thing that I would encourage you, because you are on like the front line of dealing with athletes, is to look for things that may be related, red flags that could be nutrition. One is unintentional weight loss. In other words, an athlete comes in and they're dropping some weight. During the season, it happens. Guys and gals come in at a certain weight, and then the intensity, you'll see some gradual dropping. But what that indicates is caloric need is not meeting expenditure. When that happens, you're increasing risk for injury. Because that body weight, you should never try to gain or lose weight during the season. When we try to work with athletes, it's when they're not in season. And granted that we don't use the term no off season, but you know what I'm speaking about. That's when we focus on that. We have people that come with weight loss, that's a red flag. We need to speak with them. Decrease in performance. In other words, their times either go up or their weight goes down. Whatever it is, their pitching velocity slows down. That's an indication we need to look at nutrition, because it does impact everything. Any injury, illness, fatigue, or burning out. When we look at athletes and I say, hey, how do you feel? Are you motivated to come and practice? No, I'm not. That's an indication of carbohydrate reduction. So many people think carbs are going to make me fat and this and that. We see a lot of reduction. Once we get around 45–50% or below, it impacts fatigue. And what happens is your whole attitude changes. So if you get athletes like, hey, I just don't feel like practicing anymore, that's burning out. You should never have athletes that are burned out, because if they are, that's indicating some issues. Any illness, any injury. We talk about people fighting upper respiratory or illnesses along those lines. We see it all the time. That can be also tied to carbohydrate reduction. Carbohydrate is tied to immunity. In other words, there's a whole thing with ketogenic diets and all that. I'm not going to get into that. It's beneficial for some athletes, maybe others not so much. But when they drop their carbs, their immune function drops. And then they start fighting illnesses. And we see it with a number of different teams. We're dealing with females, obviously, here, loss of irregular menstrual cycle. We used to call it the female triad. But that female triad, now we call it REDS, relative energy deficiency syndrome, include males as well. Because obviously men don't have menstrual cycles, hopefully. But what we end up seeing, though, is if men restrict caloric intake, their weight will drop, they'll start having bone-related issues and other things related to tendinopathies and so forth. So we've expanded a female triad that used to be tied just to women to include men, known as REDS. So you may be seeing more of that as well. And hopefully we're going to do some more screening here today to try to identify those. Here's a couple things I want to just hit on is more is better. The concept of that. Concept of year-round sports specialization, that lifting in season, lifting on an empty stomach and ahead of the nutrition is vital. More is better. There are certain programs right now that are trying to increase rest days. And for many of us, taking a day off is like saying, all right, students, go out and booze and you don't have to worry about getting up in the morning. What we're finding out is rest is crucial. So when you're doing year-round, which most of the athletes are doing, and some of them are doing their sport and finishing up and lifting in season. Lifting in season is fine for a well-nourished athlete. When we combine lifting and whatever their sport is, and their nutrition is poor, we're increasing risk for injury. There's no question about it. I work with athletes, let's say for runners, go out and do a 15-mile long run on a Sunday, eat some stuff in the afternoon. Monday morning, get up 6-ish, go for 5 miles, then go right to the weight room. And I say to them, I ask them, what do you eat when you wake up? Nothing. So you're dealing with someone who had their longest run of the week, then they followed up with a 5-mile run, relatively not race-based, but quick, followed up by lifting. And then I say to myself, are they really getting anything from that lifting episode? My answer will be no, they're not. So in other words, we need to be working with athletes and tell them, never lift on an empty stomach. It's a very basic concept, but a lot of us, you go to the gym, you get up in the morning, put a ball cap on, and off you go. You get a cup of joe, and you hit the weights. It's fine for people who are not on the edge of breaking down. What we need to do with those folks is make certain, eat something. I don't care what it is. Grab a bagel, grab some raisins, don't lift on an empty stomach, because when we look at muscle breakdown and synthesis, it's based on the nutrients that we either consume or we don't consume. I always think of making muscles like building a wall with bricks. If you don't have bricks, you can't do anything. And that's what the nutrients are. Those are the bricks. So, very simple rule. Guys come in or women come in. Did you eat anything? No. Eat something. Even Powerade or Gatorade. Because that alone, I'm going to hit on that in a moment, that is okay. That is okay to do. It's better than an empty gut. And lifting on empty, we just shouldn't do it, and nutrition is vital. If nutrition is balanced and they're eating during this, we will get the sport specialization will impact us. We'll get lifting in season that won't bother the athletes as well. So those are some key components. A couple things I want to hit on today are things related to some protein and protein timing with muscle synthesis and recovery. BCAAs, branched chain amino acids, which are essential. They are part of proteins, but there's some good research that specifically points to those. How do we maximize glycogen storage within muscle? That is recovery. And there are some people who are doing some really good research with maximizing glycogen, because that is a replenished or a refueled individual. And inflammation and recovery, we have to reduce inflammation. And there's some key nutritional strategies to do so. And then the concept of sleep, especially dealing with adolescents, young adults. I think sleep is a commodity I do when I don't have anything, when I'm done doing anything else. We cannot do that. And sleep is tied to chronic inflammation, chronic injuries that we see starting in adolescence carrying on into later adulthood. Never lift on an empty stomach, as I've already mentioned. I say CHOT, it's carbohydrate. Carbohydrate. There's a lot of people say, hey, the only time you need a carbohydrate drink is when an event, if I'm running or exercising longer than 90 minutes. And then I would ask the question this, we're talking about hydration. We're talking about carbohydrate. If I'm using energy up, would you not want to replace the energy? I mean, I would. It doesn't make sense to me if you say, well, for short events, just drink water. We're not talking about hydration. We're talking about maximizing carbohydrate for those athletes so they don't tank out and become injured. So whenever you have opportunities to refuel, drink some carb. I don't care if it doesn't matter. Powerade, Gatorade, they're all about the same, 6-8% carb. Do that in a place of water. You can have people hydrate. I don't care if people doing intervals. I will say to them, drink some carb because you're using it up. The faster your sport is, the more carb you're using. Endurance, we can switch into some fats and so forth. But all the quick sports are all carbohydrate based. It makes sense to me to keep topping your tank off with carbs. Couple things, protein between meals. Here's some interesting areas I would point out, depending on what your athlete is trying to do. Some people come and they say, hey, I want to put mass on. And some people come and say, hey, I'm heavy enough, but I want to modify my composition. Okay? So I'm 230 pounds, I don't want to be 250, but I want to take the 230 and turn it into 100% muscle. That's what everybody says. So I pull out the Magic Wand, they pay me $50 and nothing happens. And I say, okay, well, let's try some of these things. And the things that we're talking about today, we've tried and they're successful. Are they going to work for every single athlete? Not necessarily, but it's worth trying them. So when I look at protein between meals, when people are trying to put mass on, have them drink protein or consume additional protein between a meal. So if we do traditionally, you get up in the morning, you're eating something, go lift, have your breakfast, go right to that, then take some protein in between breakfast and lunch. That would be ideal. Take some in the afternoon, depending on their workout schedule and so forth. That will help them increase some muscle mass. If they're dedicated and are truly motivated. Believe me, I've been doing this long enough. Every athlete's like, oh yeah, I want to do this. And then we make recommendations and we see nothing. And we make other recommendations and we see whole teams put 10, 12 pounds on in 3 weeks of lifting because they're dedicated. If you follow this, it will work. When people say, hey, I want to change my composition, it doesn't necessarily mean lose weight. Then we say, we want you to drink protein with your meals. Drink protein with your meals. That will decrease some of the caloric intake a little bit, and it'll shift some of the nutrient storage that will happen in metabolism. So we'll say, hey, have your protein with a meal. So you can have your regular meal. This doesn't mean add another chicken breast. We're really talking about trying to get somewhere between 20 to 30 grams of protein load when we're speaking about adding protein. So that would help there. Protein before bed. If there's one time that I would recommend active athletes to take protein, is before going to sleep. Now, the protein that we were looking at that's beneficial is micellar casein, which is the slowest of the absorbing protein. If an athlete takes a scoop 20-25 grams of micellar casein, it's slowly digested, and what that does is it helps put muscle and prevents muscle breakdown in the evening. So if we have athletes that have had some hard training days, we'll say, hey, take some micellar before going to bed, brush your teeth. You got to remind them to do that. Because I've had athletes come up and like, I wake up, my mouth's all feeling weird. I'm like, drink it, brush your teeth, do what you do, and then go to bed. Take that protein before. When they get up in the morning, they're not as depleted. So even the guys and gals who are maybe going to the weight room right afterward, they're not tanked out. Then if they wake up, have a bagel, drink a Powerade, they're okay to hit the weight room. I feel all right with that. And then additional follow-up nutrition post. And then protein and working out. You know, if I were to ask athletes, when do you take protein, or do you take protein? Or do you consume protein? Most of us consume proteins, even we're vegans. But the question is, do you take proteins if you're drinking a supplement? Do you take it before? Do you take it after? Or take it during lifting? And I would say the majority of people athletes that I see would usually take it after. There are some that take it before, and I often wonder, are there benefits taking protein or even BCAAs before working out? And there's some absolute benefits associated with time and protein that we can see. When I say 15 to 20 grams, you can even go higher to 30, depending on the size of the athletes. And there's a few, recommendations we're trying, it depends on the weight and activity of some of the athletes we're dealing with. But there are studies that look at taking protein before working out. So in other words, getting ready to go when you're drinking down a protein, and then you go and lift. Think of it this way. The only time you're building muscle, is when you eat. When you don't, you're breaking it down. When you're practicing, you're breaking down muscle. When you're lifting, you're breaking down muscle. So then it would make sense to me, if I'm taking in a nutrient and then maximizing my muscles, whatever it may be, I can use those nutrients to break down instead of muscle. And that's what we're seeing. So there is some evidence that points maybe protein before could be beneficial for some athletes. But what the other area has to do with BCAAs, branched chain amino acids, and most of us have heard about those. They're essential, means you have to get them in our diets. And they are part of proteins. And I often wonder then, if I'm getting protein, what's the difference if I should do BCAAs, branched chain amino acids? And it's the amount, because the research looks at 5 to 10 grams per dose. And I'm going to give you some kind of, I don't want to get lost in the numbers. Some people out here may be numbers folks, maybe not. But I also say, well, what would I tell an athlete that could provide that amount of grams per kilogram, or whatever it is? Well, BCAAs, we're slowly moving our athletes into a mindset of, I would say, if you're not doing BCAAs, you're not a serious athlete. I'm literally getting to that point because of what we're seeing in the research for recovery and muscle synthesis, and also things delayed onset muscle soreness and DOMS-related issues. So my thought would be BCAAs are something an athlete should be looking at who's training at the highest level. When we look at that, we're saying how much? And we're somewhere in the range of 5 to 10 grams per individual. It's not based on body weight. And those of you who do BCAAs probably realize it's about what you probably take. There can be some issues if you go super high in BCAAs, they get converted to a couple compounds that aren't necessarily beneficial. There's even some research indicating you shouldn't supplement just one type. And a lot of people go out and say, well, leucine's the most muscle synthesizing BCAA, so I'm just going to pound down leucine. Well, that can kind of get you off balance, and it gets converted into a compound, as I stated. It's a keto acid, it's not beneficial for us. So it really is combining all three of these together. In a ratio of about 4:2:2 would be the ratio of leucine, isoleucine, valine for some of you who do BCAAs. It's a 4:2:2 is ideal. Most of the things out there are going to be a 3:2:2, maybe a 3:1:1 ratio. Leucine, isoleucine, valine. A 4:2:2 is where we see the most benefits from. With, if you did grams, it'd be 4 grams, 2 grams, 2 grams. That's what we're looking at. When I said, all right, should athletes be doing it before or after? One thing I'm looking at is like, hey, if they take it, protein synthesis is greater if they take BCAAs before. They looked at it, they've given loads of BCAAs, they test for muscle synthesis, they test for these compounds that are being secreted from damaged muscle, and they found that individuals take BCAAs before they lift have lower muscle breakdown. That's what we want, because I don't know if the people we're working with are in a good state or a bad state. I don't know that. But if I say to them, we want to do BCAAs, do it before you work out, that would be the recommendation. And to me, that's a huge difference. If we get greater muscle synthesis and lower breakdown, that's the goal. And then what are we looking at? 15 minutes and peaks at about 30. So if someone takes a BCA drink and they say, hey, when should I do it? I'm like, well, you're hanging out, you know, you're doing whatever, within a half hour of lifting, within a half hour of working out. Because then you're peaking your BCAAs, you're in a weight room or you're doing whatever you're doing or you're pitching, whatever the activity might be, and you're preventing that breakdown. So that half an hour window is fine. People say, well, I can't do this. When you're taking a liquid, even in sports where you have contact to the stomach, you still can take a liquid that gets absorbed. We're talking about solid type of things that would minimize gut type of nutrients because digestion will stop down once activity starts. Here's a study that looked at BCAAs, branched-chain amino acids, and delayed onset muscle soreness. The table to the left, or the graph to the left, is women, and the graph to the right are men. The take-home message, they gave each of these men and women, I'm not going to go into all methods, but they gave each of them 5 grams of BCAAs. Then they followed them. And they said, okay, report muscle soreness. It was kind of subjective. They had these scales for how sore you feel and so forth. But people use them. So, I mean, they're a reliable tool. And they found, those of you came maybe from the back, the lower level, the lower ones are basically reports of those with the BCAAs. What they found was taking BCAAs actually reduces muscle soreness, reported muscle soreness. The one to the left are women, the one to the right are men. Men didn't see as much of it, and it wasn't significant, but the women did. And I said, well, why is that? Why is that? It was a dosage. They both took 5 grams. The guy's body mass, generally speaking, in this study it was much greater than the women. Because of that, they should have bumped their BCA level up in the men, and they would have seen the same effects that they did with the females. Take-home message is this: we can reduce soreness through BCA consumption, which is something. Soreness impacts performance, and it impacts also practices and increased risk for injury. Here's a table, because I don't want to just talk about, oh, just take it in a drink and so forth, because I'm a firm believer in food and nutrition through food. But with athletes, it's about timing, and there's only so many pounds of chicken breast that you can consume before you get tired. To me, when I'm drinking, or someone's drinking BCAAs or a protein drink or whatever else is out there, that's for convenience. That's for convenience and actual maximizing certain loads. So you can see if we're looking at BCAAs, and I want to get between 5 to 10 grams, a chicken breast, has about 6.6, give or take. I mean, it's somewhere in that range. So I have to double some chicken breast there. 6 ounces is a fair amount. 4 ounces is what your typical breast may be. But you could do that. You could get a couple chicken breasts and eat that and still get your levels of BCAAs. And then we have lean beef and so forth. The BCAAs here that we're focusing on are going to be the meat-based type products. You can get some BCAAs like this in some plants. My concern is these pro-inflammatory fats that come in plants, because it's a mixed thing. It's not like, well, we get this, but there's downsides. Now, I'm going to look to try and maximize recovery, and we're going to look at these. One thing here you can see is canned tuna. And people who know me have spoken. If there's one thing that would encourage every athlete, every individual to consume, it's fish. There's not a question in my mind, about fish consumption. Because fish is actually hitting on every topic that we're hitting here today. Every single one. Protein and BCAAs after. Protein combined with some carbohydrate, chow carbohydrate. 1 to 2 hours post. The science actually indicates that even 12 hours post-working out, your body will still absorb the proteins and use those. But the maximizing absorption and actual muscle synthesis and repair is within the 1 to 2 hour frame. So that can be easy for some athletes and not so easy. We have traveling guys and gals who travel on the road, and they need to be eating taking the protein within that 1 to 2 hours. And if they say, well, it's 4 or 5, that delay is going to be crucial. But we do know if we combine it with some carbohydrate, so take a protein drink or eat a piece of chicken, but take in some carb. Take it in with a bagel. What does that carbohydrate do? Carbohydrate is going to get an insulin spike. That insulin spike is going to tell the body to build. Insulin is, in a sense, I would say it's a growth hormone, but it's a growth-related type hormone. It tells the body, build. That's what we want to do. So people say, well, I'm just doing protein, no carb. I'm like, hold on, man. Just try combining some carbohydrate. That way you're also not going to burn up your protein for energy. It's going to be diverted to your muscle. When we work with individuals and I say combine some protein and carb together, I see the gains they're getting just from that recommendation. So if you're doing, if you want to do protein, or try to combine it with some carb, and I think that would be beneficial. BCAAs also post have been shown to be okay, but I don't look at it this way. BCAAs prior to working out, protein after, either through diet or through some other means, is really going to maximize your thing. Then they looked at two fatty acids, EPA and DHA, icosapentaenoic acid and icosahexaenoic acid. These are omega-3 fatty acids, and I don't get lost in the weeds of fats, but I will also say this to you. All of the research that looks at reducing inflammation among athletes has to do with these two fats. Not omega-3s, because there's omega-3s that come from certain plants that are not as beneficial. They don't get converted into these. Anyone says you take something in from a plant, I don't care if it's some chia seeds that has omega-3, it doesn't get converted into these. These are found in fish. That's where you find them. So people who don't like fish, as much as I hate to say, try fish oil pills. This has to do with athletes that combine these fish oil pills with carbohydrate post. They found that they had greater muscle synthesis when they combine them with these fats. And I haven't seen products out there that are doing this because of the flavor of some of these fats. But to me, it's pretty easy. If I'm looking at a post protein, I'm having somebody have some tuna. The little, those tinfoil bags, you tear those open. I think you can throw them in a gym bag anywhere. You're done working out, you tear it open, you eat your tuna. It's a very easy thing. We have a lot of athletes who are carrying their tuna fish doing that, and that's beneficial. Glycogen stores, that's about recovery. If your glycogen stores, which is stored glucose in the muscle, I'm walking right now using who knows? I'm probably using a little bit of carb. Now, if I continue to work out and I'm going somewhere else, I got to replenish those. If you don't replenish glycogen stores, you're going to fatigue, and that's what we would want to avoid. Most of you have heard the term carbo loading. And what carbo loading is taking a high percentage of carbohydrates in a short time frame and try to maximize your load within muscle. The nice thing of that for athletes is they can store more glycogen than a non-athlete. They upregulate enzymes that store it. Glycogen synthase is upregulated in an athlete. So we can maximize the load in them versus someone who's just kind of walking to their mailbox. What we'd like to do here, though, in a short period of time, because people say, hey, I have an event, and I'm training, and these multi-day events are the killers. I don't care what it is, if you're playing or practicing or playing Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, and people, you watch their times either go up or the basic performance goes down. And that's going to be in the case of nutrition. The training is there. I mean, to get at any level, the training is there. And that says, hey, we got to time some nutrition. So what we've been trying to do is maximize glycogen recovery for those days. So they're topped off as best as they can, day in and day out. What we do with that is, as you can see here, is look at creatine. Now, creatine monohydrate is probably one of the most supplemented of all of them. Totally safe, totally safe. Creatine monohydrate, probably at some levels shown a little bit better than creatine hydrochloride. I mean, I've seen the research on it. Creatine monohydrate is fine. So they're looking at a number of different areas with creatine. They really are. The science isn't conclusive on it. You always find one study shows, one study that doesn't. But we do know this. If we can combine some creatine with some carbohydrate throughout the day, in this case we're looking at a very low level of carb, split it up 4 times a day. Instead of having to do a week of carbo loading, if we can do, if I say, hey, do 5 grams of creatine, then we're going to do 2 grams per kilogram. So if someone's a 220-pound athlete, that's 100 kilograms, so that's 200 grams of carb, or 800 calories. All right, that's probably, what is that, 8, 9 Oreos. Okay, a little bit of raisins, a bagel, 2 bagels, something like that. And then we're doing creatine with it. That will maximize absorption within the muscle tissue. There's a couple different hypotheses with some GLUT4 receptor upregulation and a few others, but this is easy to do. People say, well, creatine upsets my stomach, I get diarrhea from it. When that happens, it's usually athletes who are loading 10 to 20 up. If they're big athletes, it's okay, but when we have smaller body weight athletes who are doing this creatine before and after, it's too much to be absorbed, it gives them diarrhea because it pulls water out and they don't have to go to the bathroom. So if you get someone complaining of getting, diarrhea, loose stool from taking creatine, you got to back the levels down. That's all that indicates to me. This is where trying for those short kind of windows we have with some of our athletes for cardio. The creatine's in food, and you can see once again we're looking at primarily meat sources. So Herring, you have to eat a fair amount of herring, ounces of herring, but if I look at beef and salmon, we can still get some decent creatine combined. That will help with our carbs. So once again, we can do one of two things. We can take creatine and we can eat some protein that has creatine with our carbohydrate throughout the day, and that will be beneficial for our athletes. The dietary fats, reducing inflammation. This is the one area with athletes, you can be fighting inflammation and not know it. And inflammation is part of the repairing process. The different stages, so inflammation is necessary. But if we have too much inflammation, it impacts range of motion. Range of motion in some sports then indicates a decrease in performance. We want to reduce that among athletes. How do we do it? We're looking again at EPA and DHA. So if someone wants to go out and do pills, they can do about 1 to 2 grams of these fish pills, and that will help reduce inflammation. If they want to get selenium, which is an antioxidant, which every athlete should be consuming, your best source for selenium is going to be fish. The only other source of selenium, the highest one that's off the charts, are Brazil nuts. And this time of year, you see them in a bowl. They're one of the hardest ones to crack. It's hard to crack, and you can get them already husked. Those are thousands and thousands of milligrams in a cup of Brazil nuts, if you so choose that. But selenium, also found in fish, is going to help reduce the inflammation without using any of these NSAIDs or Tylenols and all those, because they actually can reduce some muscle synthesis by taking in some of these NSAIDs. Saturated fats, to me, is something I would discourage consuming post-working out or post-event. So when athletes are done playing, they say, hey, I'm going to have pizza, I'm going to do wings. I'm going to say, why don't you wait? If you're going to do wings, you do pizza with the guys, let's look at a 4-hour window and then go out and do it. When we have people who are, let's say, are pitchers in rotation, and then they're done pitching, they go and start chewing on seeds, sunflower seeds. That's a bad thing. Sunflower seeds are pro-inflammatory. So if you want to do seeds, and I don't take the seeds away from our guys, but I say when you're done pitching, man, you go and you hydrate, have some carb, have some protein, relax for a little bit, and then have your seeds later on. That's not what we want to be doing. So saturated fats in cheeses, whole milk, people ask me about chocolate milk all the time. Is that a good thing? And I'm like, yeah. Do your chocolate milk, it's fine, just make sure it's skimmed. Not 2%. 2%, whole milk is 3.25%. So when somebody says, oh, I'm doing 2% milk, that's only 1.25% reduction of fat. Those are saturated fats are not beneficial. They reduce glycogen storage, so what ends up happening is the saturated fats are going to reduce the recovery rate, or I should say make it longer, and it's going to reduce the repair of muscle and lead to increased soreness and so forth. Saturated fats found in dairy, danishes, all that kind of good foods that many athletes would like to do. These down here, cherry, blueberry, blackberry, red grapes, or red cabbage, it has to do with a compound called cyanidin. Oh, I'm going to say almost every other athlete I deal with now is dealing with tendinopathies. And I look at tendinopathies as tendinitis. Tendinitis is really a form of tendinopathy. But I look at tendinopathy as, here's the issue with that. We are demanding more of an underdeveloped tendon than they can handle with the workload. So when they're doing this year-round baseball, year-round swimming, swimming could be one of the worst ones we're starting to see now. It's repetitive motion. It's always up here, right? Unless you kick cold yourself. I don't think you do that. Unless you hold the board. So what ends up happening is, year after year after year, they're demanding on this. Tendons don't fully develop. They cannot handle the workload. So what ends up happening is you get older, you get to collegiate level, and all of a sudden like, hey, I got this soreness, all of a sudden range of motion. If we can minimize or reduce tendinopathies, we'll be doing a great job. Right now, it's I would have to say it's one of the major issues that we're having to deal with. And a lot of big U's are putting their athletes on days off. Days off. I think complete ones. USC, days off during the week from everything, including lifting. As I said, it's counterintuitive what we kind of brought up with, but it goes back to try to let the tendon heal and rest. The problem is, by the time they come to collegiate levels or later, and they're dealing with this, they're kind of shot. They're almost, like I said, damaged goods. Any kind of surgeries, it's going to be, they could be really dumb. So, how do we do that? We try to increase these nutrients. We're trying to put together actually nutrition recommendations just for tendinopathy. There's not a lot of research out there on it. There just isn't. There's a lot of rodent research where they take tendons out and so forth. But we see it all the time. Shoulders and elbows. And then knees a little bit there all the time. So if you're dealing with tendinopathy issues, it's going to be a long road for that athlete to recover fully, but we want to prevent that. Those are going to contain that. Those are the color pigments. That will help. When people talk about eating fruits and vegetables, and I hear that so often, I'm like, I can't even say it. I'm not going to say it. I'm going to come to the hacks. I would say this to you. It's all fruit and vegetables aren't the same. But what I see up here are berries and cherries. A lot of good research on that with sleep enhancing and recovery. We're looking here at pigments. I would say this. If you can take something and squish it in your hands, if you're not strong enough to squish it in your hands, I'm sorry, but if you squish it in your hands and then wash it, or wipe it on yourself, and you look and you see colored pigments, that's a good thing. That's what you want. That's the pigmentation that is beneficial for reducing inflammation and helping with tendon health. We just need to be a little bit more preventative with that, which is difficult. The EPA, DHAs in the fish up there, also you can see, if you have some salmon, you're well within the 1 to 2 grams of DHA. So it's very achievable with food, very achievable with food. Vitamin D. Every athlete should be taking vitamin D. Every athlete should be taking vitamin D. We're trying to get funding here at part of the Sports Nutrition Council Center and so forth to try to get every single athlete screened for serum levels of D. I've already put together an executive summary of the proposal. That's what I want us to move to. It will take some funding, obviously, but D is crucial. In the years that I've been doing nutrition, I've seen the changes in D, and people are like, well, what's it with vitamin D? What's with vitamin D? It's the receptors on cells. They're finding a lot of cells have receptors for D. They don't know what it does. I would say this to any of you, you all should be taking D. Every single one of you. Your physician, if he or she is ahead of the literature, that's a good thing. If you go to a physician and do waist circumference instead of BMI, shake their hand, ask them where they went to school, because you're getting someone who knows what they're doing. Stay ahead of the curve. Don't be preaching yesterday's stuff. So to me, vitamin D is something everybody should be taking. When we look at deficiencies in athletes, there are some certain athletes that are very, very low in D. There are some schools screening everybody and supplementing and paying for it. UNC is one of them. They are literally screening every athlete that comes in, supplements them, rescreens them, and then follows them. So they have the ability to do it because they're a medical center. But the take-home message is this: D is crucial. During the NFL combines, they look at individuals because they're trying to make contracts for millions of dollars. They look at guys who are pulling hamstrings, injuring their hamstrings injuries. And they look for injuries in lower extremities, calves, ankles, and so forth. They found, as you can see, there was 4 times greater incident of hamstring injuries among individuals with low D. Now, when I saw that, I'm thinking, geez, I see a lot of hamstring-type pulls and injuries. And it's beyond dehydration. It's like cramping. It's way beyond dehydration. We're looking at D. So, if we can reduce pulled hamstrings or lower extremity injuries by supplementing D, that's what we should be doing. The amount of units for someone who's interested is about 5,000 IU. 5,000 IU is where the Endocrine Society feels it should be. Those are the folks I listen to. The levels of D, Endocrine Society. If you ever get your blood work checked, you go and get your cholesterol and so forth. Get your vitamin D checked. You'll have to ask them because it's an additional, additional lab work that they will do. I say this to everyone, every athlete, when you get